Dr. Tanner's on the mic, healing wounds unspoken. Trauma on the table, bandages broken open. Folks walking shattered, leave with hearts wide awoken. Transformed through the pain, from the dark to the golden. Traumatic makeover, she's guiding through the fire. With every word, lifting spirits higher. Changing lives, setting souls on wire. In her eyes, the strength to inspire. Broken hearts to mended, stories she untangles. Lives redefined, no more skewed angles. From shadows of the past to brightened dreams, Dr. Tanner lights the path, so it seems. Dramatic makeover, she's guiding through the fire. With every word, lifting spirits higher. Changing lives, setting souls on wire. In her eyes, the strength to inspire.
Well, good evening, and thank you again. And I said thank you again, why? Because you're joining us tonight on Traumatic Makeover TV. I'm Dr. Andrea Tanner, and we are here again. We're here to get healed. We're here to get empowered, and we are here to be transformed. This is by mental health education. We're talking to our community, right? Mental health education, personal stories, and trauma recovery. You're going to love my guest tonight. Yes, love her. She's also a very, very esteemed and educated and knowledgeable and all of those things. She is very, very, let's go with this. She's an intellectual. So I want to really give you some information about our guest, okay? Her name is Dr. Alauna. And so, well, tell you what, I'm going to read a little bit about her. So in an era of growing awareness about the lasting impact of psychological trauma, Dr. Alauna, known as the Skills Over Pills Doc, promotes mental healing through brain science, emotional intelligence, and empathy skills practice. Her approach shifts perspectives for better thoughts, emotions, and actions, redefining trauma recovery as a path to self-empowerment and authenticity while fostering empathy and inclusiveness. She is redefining trauma, fueling the empathy evolution. Now, Dr. Alauna is a trauma psychiatrist. Let me give her her props. She went to medical school. She's a trauma psychiatrist. She's also a speaker, a master educator, an author, and empathy ambassador. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Alauna. Good evening.
Hey there. Well, hello, Doctor. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You are so welcome. You're so welcome. I am blessed, actually. I know we had talked about it earlier, but seeing you here in Houston, Texas, out at an event and hearing your presentation was life-changing to me. Just purely life-changing. And so I could not do this podcast without inviting you because you're life-changing. So without further ado, I'm going to give it to you. And when I say that, just tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and then we're going to go on from there.
Sure. Well, just a little bit about me from some background. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I went to Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans for undergrad, and then I came to Houston and attended Baylor College of Medicine for medical school, and then I stayed at Baylor for psychiatry residency. And after I completed my psychiatry training, I practiced at the Houston VA Medical Center for several years in the trauma recovery program. And I started off on the outpatient side, taking care of veterans, and saw a wide variety of conditions related to PTSD and wrapped around PTSD, like substance problems and eating disorders and personality disorders, etc. And they
Mhm.
noticed that I was pretty good. And they said, "Hey, we want you to be the psychiatrist for our inpatient program for returning Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans called Rover." And then, because they were playing with Obama's funding, I ended up having to be the women's program psychiatrist as well and the Wiser program. And in those roles, I was actually able to have a unique perspective of learning about trauma and teaching my veterans because they'd come into the hospital and they'd spend a month in getting multidisciplinary services, like a year's worth of
Mhm.
trauma treatment, all in 1 month. And I was really there able to live that experience with them and contribute and learn from all of the professionals that I was exposed to. So that's how I kind of came to this trauma psychiatrist label, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little
Well,
bit of
but
my
oh,
story.
wow. Well, already you've given a depth of information. And when I say that, meaning we can pull just from that because you working with combat veterans, I'm sure you've seen just a plethora of different traumas, complex traumas to come your way, especially I'm familiar with the Rover and the Wiser program, but for people who are not, can you go pretty much in depth of what that was? I know I don't think that is in existence right now, but what the Rover and the Wiser program was with the Department of Veteran Affairs at the Michael E. DeBakey VAMC, right?
Okay, put some respect on it. Yes. So, um, the those programs were very unique because we received veterans from not only all over the Houston region, but from really all over the country. Sometimes they would come to our program, and they were carefully selected in that they all had PTSD diagnosis, but more importantly, they were able to be there for a month in a supported wraparound environment. So, this is 24-hour nursing care. This is a psychologist teaching cognitive processing therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. We had a social worker who was working with them in case management and teaching anger management, occupational therapy, teaching them life skills, recreational therapy, teaching them how to rest and relax again. And then myself as a psychiatrist was there to not only clarify their diagnosis, but streamline their medications, and more importantly, teach them why they were having the experiences that they were having. And I
Mhm.
also was at the interface of studying traumatic brain injuries, right? Because, who gets more of those than, other than the NFL and our soldiers. So, in reading the literature and the research about traumatic brain injuries, I was learning myself about new information of understanding what brain systems are operating to create certain symptoms. And I translated that to my veterans. I would teach them about not only what this diagnosis is, but like why your brain is giving you that experience. Why are you so, why are you triggered and so antsy that you can't sit in a restaurant, and what is that about? And what are the underlying driving forces? And actually, what I found is that when we were teaching that element, when I added that understanding to my education to them, they started getting better so much faster. Like to the
Wow.
point where I was like, we got to study this. But when I
Yeah.
took it to the powers that be,
Mhm.
they could not appreciate um, you know, being able to recognize it, I'm saying, hey, this is something different here. And this is really something that we need to put time and energy into. At the time, there was a lot of things going on. And of course, I'm just little Dr. Davis, little Dr. Curry, who would train through their medical programs and residency programs. So, they just couldn't hear what I was on. But also, I ended up experiencing some traumas myself. So, for one, Michael Brown Jr. was killed, and that was a big deal for me, being from St. Louis. And at the time, I was married to a police officer, and my son's name was Michael. And so many things just about that situation connected to me. And not only that, but when I was a little youngster growing up in St. Louis, me and Michael Brown Jr. probably would have been friends. Okay, we'd have been out there in the streets, like hanging out. I was that kind of kid. So from that standpoint, I really I had been working with police officers and teaching and training them within the VA and within municipal police officers, and was very connected to law enforcement. But it forced me into a space of empathy for both sides. I could understand both sides of the equation of how that became a deadly situation. And it forced me to do some self-reflection. And in that self-reflection, I began to realize that I was hearing trauma patterns in everybody. And I'm like, either I'm crazy or everybody is traumatized. Because, that's not the way we're taught to think about it. Like trauma is like a sub-segment of mental health in the way that we think about it. And, some people get over that bar that we've set that would indicate PTSD or indicate this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But I began to reflect on that designation of trauma, and it didn't make sense because I'm seeing in my patient. Uh-oh. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here. I can hear you. You kind of slow down, but that's fine. We got you.
My whole system went dark for a second.
We see you.
Okay, I came back. Okay, my
Yeah.
whole system went down for a second. Okay,
Yeah, I
so
was really getting
just
into it.
in that experience, I'm sorry.
That's
Okay,
okay.
so wait a minute. What was I talking about? My
Well,
computer
you said
blanked out.
just in that
Where was I?
experience. You were saying just in that
Okay,
experience.
so I was basically in that space of listening for the trauma patterns from my patients, but I was hearing them in my colleagues, I was hearing them in my family and my friends and everybody else. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm doing this too long, but I'm hearing these thought processes and these extremes. And of course, the last place I looked was me. And as I started listening to my thought processes and the way that I was expressing myself and really honing in on those patterns, I was noticing them in myself as well. And that's where I connected the dots about these primitive brain systems that I teach about, that all of us have a brain anatomy that is functioning, that's recognizing traumas, whether we know to call it that language or not. Your brain is actually being programmed by those experiences. And that was mind blowing to me. It was like finding fire when I started to see these things and realize these things. And so I started talking to everybody I knew. I was like asking other psychiatrists and other physicians and other mental health practitioners, and no one else had been taught about this stuff. And that stressed me out. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, because it sounds like you were going deeper than anyone else even thought to.
Yes. And as I said, it was a journey of trauma within my own self, because then I'm also looking like I went to excellent institutions. I'm operating at the top of, like, who else is doing trauma work the way the VA is doing it, right? So if the people in my space are even not thinking about it like this, then here's this huge missing hole of how the entire mental health field, and in conjunction with that, the medical field, is missing some very key information about mental health and the basics of how we're designed.
Well, that's an excellent point because even though the VA does lead in it, there's so much to be learned because behind you, you think about so many different errors when we're talking about veterans, right? And people who have gone to
Mhm.
combat from, uh, I would say, from the Civil War to now. But PTSD has just really come to the forefront as far as knowledge base in this generation since Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation New Dawn, this new war, we're hearing about it. And so we're like behind the power curve. And so you are now seeing this population at this rate, and it's stimulating some things for you. It's
Mhm.
opening
Mhm.
mind-boggling doors for you to say, hey, have you thought of this? Sounds like you're just way above. Hmm,
Let
I,
me let me let me check. Let me offer a different word than above,
okay.
because what I realized
Or
was
ahead.
that, well, maybe ahead, but certainly
Mhm.
not above, because I wrestle with these primitive brain systems all day, every day myself. And that
Okay.
was really the biggest revelation, is that none of us are above our brain and our biology. It's
Mm,
just was something every person, like, what to call the part of your arm that bends it. What do you call this? It's an elbow,
yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Those terms that you were taught when you were in elementary school, we should have been taught amygdala, right? So, for example, I just spoke today to an audience and I asked them, where were you taught emotions come from growing up? Most of them said we weren't. Nobody even mentioned it. That never came up, right? But
Mhm.
some people would say their heart or your gut or the situation. The other person makes you feel this way or that way. Or,
Mhm.
people were taught God or angels, demons, the devil.
Mhm.
That is all archaic, outdated information that we have an answer to. The amygdala creates your emotions. It's a
Yeah.
part of your brain. Everybody has one, so there's no such the myth about men having no emotions and women having too many. That is just not how it works.
Mhm.
Emotions are not just when you're or when you're screaming, ah,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
emotions are present 100% of the time. If you're a working human, your amygdala never stops functioning. And in fact, it creates your emotions not based on reality, objective data. It creates your emotions based on what you perceive, what your brain is perceiving, and what you believe is happening in a situation. So if you tell yourself, this is the worst day of my life, your amygdala is gonna be like, is it really? Boosh, here you go. You're
Yeah.
welcome, right?
Yeah.
So understanding these parts of our brain and what they're doing every day, whether we care about it or not, or into it or not, is into you. Is your brain is doing you right now as you speak every single day. So it was that process of actually learning to think about myself as I say a three-part creature:
Mhm.
animal, human, and spirit. Every single one of us has biology that is creating our psychology, and then our psychology creates our choices, and then we live out either the primitive version that comes from letting that primitive brain run by default, or we're able to create a more evolved version from using our prefrontal cortex, which is that part sitting right there behind our forehead, do
Mhm.
do do, waiting on us to wake it up. Studies show that we use 10 to 15% of our prefrontal cortex. So
Mm.
if we're only using 10 to 15% of the highest evolved part of our brain, that's our best decision maker, that helps us think about short and long-term goals and keep ourselves on track to get to those. then what's running the rest of you is the input of that primitive brain and those very loud biological experiences that we've just never been taught about. So we don't even know that that's what's happening.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
now I'm hearing this. Was what happens though to someone who have experienced trauma? What does that look like?
So, for one, trauma is a human condition that everyone will experience.
Mhm.
So now everyone will not experience the same traumas and everyone will not have the same traumatic load. So one of the things that I had to do is actually redefine how I thought about trauma, because there's this kind of false bar in the sky, I guess is the best way I could describe it, in the way that we tend to think about trauma. Like you have to go to war, you have to be a veteran in a lot of people's minds. And when you talk to the veterans, they're like, well, if I didn't lose a leg or have have some kind of obvious injury like somebody else that I know did, or die, that my trauma shouldn't even count either. So in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, we play um, we minimize traumas in part because we don't, we compare it to other people. We say, okay, my thing is not as bad. It shouldn't feel this way, right? But also, our traumas are based on so many different things, right? Like it's traumatic to be a brown person, a person of color in this world, because we have these false concepts of multiple races and, things that have been made up to actually create and justify slavery, caste systems, all manner of abuse. And what we actually now know is that there's only one human race, and genetically we're 99% the same. So,
But what I was speaking of more specifically, Ben, I'm glad you brought that up. More
mm,
specifically is not we understand that trauma is not based on um, war,
mhm,
meaning you don't have to go to war to have trauma. The impact of
mhm,
trauma can be that you witness someone get murdered on the street corner, or someone get
mhm,
robbed on it, or you got robbed. But
mhm,
more so, as you were talking, I was thinking about complex trauma, and I was thinking about a race of people who were taken from a foreign land and had
mhm.
to endure trauma all of the time, compared to a race of people who had minimal trauma. So,
Go ahead. You want?
no, no, go on, go on.
Okay. So this is what I would say is that, by definition, the way I think of trauma is any situation that is experienced negatively enough that it causes you to change the way you think about yourself, others, and the rest of the world. And so that's actually a fairly broad definition of trauma. But
Mhm,
it's important to recognize that even for something like American chattel slavery, Black people were absolutely traumatized. And it is traumatizing for people to be part of an oppressive race, part of an oppressive ethnicity. When you mistreat people and you dehumanize people, you also are allowing yourself to behave animalistically. You're separating from the humanity in yourself and in other people. And that in and of itself is damaging. And we're
mhm,
actually living we are living the outcomes right now of not ever addressing the psychological trauma of slavery in all of our populations,
yeah,
because the beliefs that get programmed through painful experiences are still driving our false concepts and tribalism that we're experiencing right now, that's tearing apart our global society. So
mhm,
it is, but to answer your question, trauma comes in different forms. So when we think about trauma, like we mentioned, getting,
mhm,
hit or become a victim of a crime, but trauma is actually more often happening without anybody touching you.
mhm.
Words can be traumatic. Uh,
Yes.
thought process. It's people getting traumatized in their churches when when they're being told some things about themselves and made to feel terrible or guilty or whatever about some things that are a part of who they are. There are people who are being traumatized in their families, in their households, by the teasing and the joking and the some of the things that your boo may be saying to you, or your parents might be saying to you. So very often, when we think of traumas, we are thinking of the big ones, if you will, things that are kind of more obvious. But more often, what is actually death by a thousand invisible cuts are the day-to-day interactions. The black man who went to work and trained other people, that white men that were going to come in and get a job and move up, and he's living in that every day and seeing that happening. But he's got to be tough, he's got to be strong, he's supposed to come home and just bring his money home. Like, he's experiencing day to day multiple times a day trauma, racial trauma, racism trauma, that is never acknowledged, right? And so when we think of complex trauma, or as something that we would say ongoing traumatic, person living in ongoing trauma, what any trauma is doing is programming your brain, and it's programming six specific parts of your brain, which I won't necessarily go through all of them at this particular moment. We'll do that in a little bit, but it's programming your brain to keep you safe, and it's programming it to look around at the environment and watch for certain things and make you react to things in a way that hopefully you can prevent having that pain or having that situation happen again. Unfortunately, what that means is that people generalize, like, oh, if I got hurt by somebody, then all people like that person. If I got hurt by a man, all men are dogs. And, if I got hurt by a woman, all women are gold diggers. And, being able to recognize, okay, I've been hurt by a doctor at a doctor's appointment. Not all medicine is bad, but in that person's mind, their brain goes to extremes because they want to prevent that pain from happening again.
And we call
So
that
that's
stuff.
really
Yeah.
yeah, that's the pattern we see.
Can I pause for a moment, because you said something that I absolutely loved and I had to write it down.
Okay.
Death by 1,000 invisible cuts. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we really thought about that, death by 1,000 invisible cuts. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's psychological trauma, is the wounds that you don't see. And because we have never been actually taught to appreciate those experiences, and like we talked about before we started, like, we're resilient and we're strong and we push on, and yes, we can do all of that, but we also have the highest incidence of heart disease killing Black women younger, and we're being diagnosed later for breast cancer and prostate cancer because we don't trust the system, and we have all of these phobias and things that keep us from being able to get actual advanced medical treatment, so on and so forth. So it takes its toll, even though the Black don't be bragging, the inside, right?
Be
The
boiling,
stress,
boiling.
you're boiling on the inside with all of the stress and the things that are being held out. And oftentimes it's taken out on friends, it's taken out on family, or it's taken out on yourself in the form of self-medicating, or doing other unhealthy things to try to feel better, to cope with those traumas. And that's what manifests as what we call depression and anxiety and PTSD. Because I want to point out, like, we're the same human beings, the human design that was here 100 years ago, when they didn't understand PTSD and they were having shell shock. If you saw The Last Samurai, you remember that movie, Last Samurai, years and years ago. So we talk about even a story that was told hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. They were having PTSD. We just didn't call it that. We didn't have MRIs and EEG machines to be able to know what's going on in the brain and at any given time. So we're literally, modern medicine has put us at the first time in history where we can really grasp and understand what's going on inside of our brain. And we need to tune into it and
Yeah.
understand it because it explains a lot about humans and how not only how we are behaving right now, but how we've behaved for many years.
Wow. I hope whoever is listening or will listen have just really heard that, because we are, wow, in a sense, I want to say a dying civilization, because even though, as you said, black don't crack, but inside our bodies are being torn. And that's not lying. That is self evident, of stress. And we think stress is good. There's good stress, or we've done this. And as you had said before, resiliency. I don't need to wear that up here, but we need to deal with whatever those issues are. And the best part of it is being educated. Being educated. And Dr. Alana, I'm telling you, like I said, I'm taking notes because of the fact that I am looking at it on the psychological side, but you are just really educating me on the psychiatry side of things and how you look at it. So, wow, 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 wow. I'm going to give it back to you. I'm sure you want to pick up somewhere.
Well, let me offer maybe some more. Well, I want to offer a hopeful perspective
Okay.
because while all things go in cycles, and I do think that we are experiencing the dying of a certain way of operating, I do believe that we are evolving to a different approach to civilization, a different approach to being human, if you
How
will.
so? How so?
Well, the answer for our problems is sitting right inside of our forehead. I
Okay.
mean, the answer to our issues is for all of us to actually learn how we work. And there are 6 primitive brain systems that are crucial to understand in order to just understand human behavior. So the
Okay.
first one we already talked about, which is the amygdala. It's the
Mhm.
part of our it's the part of our brain that creates our emotions. And that part of our brain is always functioning. So now we can challenge those when we start try to dismiss our emotions, when we start thinking we don't have them or we should suppress them or repress them, we can change the way we think about that because they're just something that we are supposed to have and understand. They are present. If we try to ignore them in ourselves or other people, then we are engaging in intentionally primitive and delusional behavior. Okay. When I say primitive, that's what I don't think we're dying. I think we're primitive. The good news
Okay.
is we've done all of this and made this society on the juice from our primitive brain. So imagine what we can do if we can learn to use our more evolved minds. So the
Okay.
second brain system that we
Mhm.
need to understand is the somatosensory cortex. That's the part of our brain that registers pain, and that part of our brain, it treats physical and psychological pain the same way. So it doesn't if the same way somebody can hurt you if and slightly differently if they punch, kick, or pinch you, words also and interactions, the way we interpret them, the way we operate around each other, we create pain. And that's a very real thing that sets off cascades of chemicals in our bodies. And it's also programmed by psychological trauma. So all of those brain systems are creating an internal experience that we've been taught to ignore. Um, I'm
Okay.
go to number 3, unless you want to say anything
No, I am a
there.
student. I am a student here. I have it. Well, number one, amygdala. Number two, somatic sensory cortex. So I
Okay,
am.
all right. So uh-huh, yes, and okay, number 3, our reticular activating system. Your RAS is the part of your brain that is like a filter. It's your awareness filter. It's constantly scanning the environment around you and honing in your attention just to the things that you need to pay attention to. We can't process every single thing that's happening in our body and brain all at once. And so what our brain does is tries to be energy efficient, and it narrows you down to certain things that you need to focus on. It's it think about when you can have like a fire alarm beeping in the background and you hear it, but you kind of tune it out right after a while because your brain doesn't need that information. Somebody else go change that battery, girl, right? And like, oh my goodness, I didn't even hear it anymore. Or on the other side of that, the reticular activating system hones you in on certain things. And so, and for example, someone who's experienced trauma before, and maybe you got hurt in your previous relationship, and somebody, your new boo hadn't done anything to you, but that text message goes right, and then your brain sets off that amygdala and goes, oh my gosh, it's happening again. I'm not going. And here you are sneaking in somebody's phone, messing up in your relationship because that reticular activating system highlighted and magnified that experience. So all of us are walking around with a distorted perception of reality every day.
My goodness. Okay.
Number 4, the brain reward system. Your brain reward system is your addiction system. It's the part of your brain that drives repeated behaviors, and we
Mhm.
have a lot of those. And it's driven by the chemical dopamine, which is our pleasure chemical. So when we do something that feels good or something that our body likes, that dopamine dumps into our system, but it gets processed out very fast, and then we want more. So dopamine is a human experience. Every single one of us have addictions. I'm going to just run a list real quick,
Oh,
okay? Not because most of the time when people think addictions, they think alcohol or cocaine or opioids and benzos, but we're also talking about caffeine and nicotine and salt and
mhm.
sex and sugar and shopping and gambling and all the, video games and screens and social
And
media
chocolate, and chocolate,
and
and
it's sugar, okay, right? So
yeah,
dopamine
yes.
is our ever-present compadre, okay?
Okay.
And none of us are free of addictions. It's not a question of if, the question is, what are you addicted to? It can be work or money or salaries or purses or church or whatever else. But where do we get our dopamine from? And unfortunately, some people have addictions that land them in poverty or in a horrible situation. So we think of that when we think about addictions, we're thinking of the extreme, but they're just getting their dopamine from something that's harder to control. But we get our dopamine from these screens, we get our dopamine from each other. And so it's important to understand that all of us have these brain systems operating at all times. I think our
Mhm.
biggest addiction is being right personally, but that's that's my guess. That's my guess. Okay.
Yeah.
So number 5, the fifth brain system is mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are a part of our brain that soaks up information from the environment and then kicks it out as a reflection in our behavior.
Mhm.
One way I remember when I was first learning about mirror neurons and trying to explain it to my veterans, I found myself where my kids were interrupting a lot, and I was like, why do they keep interrupting? They were younger, they were like,
Mhm.
toddlers, 4 and 7 or so, I think. And I remember like, gosh, these kids keep interrupting people. And then I started watching myself. And I heard myself, and I
Mhm.
started really being able to use, empathy skills to hear myself outside of myself. And I'm like, girl, you interrupting too. Okay. You're
Mhm.
interrupting self. And I realized that as I started checking myself and recognizing when I was interrupting them and saying, let me go ahead, please finish. That I interrupted, and recognizing that they began to do that as well. Their behavior mirrored mine, and they were able to absorb a different way of
Mhm.
interacting. So in that space, our mirror neurons are really trying to pick up the environment and keep us safe by helping us learn and mimic the sounds and the behaviors and the thought processes around us. But unfortunately, that also deeply programs our emotional responses and reactions. So these are the situation where somebody might have grown up in a household like, I'll never do what my dad did to my mom. And then when they get angry and they find themselves hitting on somebody, whatever, and then they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. What's wrong with me? I'm so sorry. It's because those deeply ingrained patterns often come out in those times of stress. So understanding how we soak things up
Mhm.
from our environment and reflect it back is really important as well. One last brain system to go.
Okay.
And that is our biochemical matrix, which is a fancy way of saying all of the hormones and the chemicals and the juices that our body makes, like serotonin and testosterone and estrogen and cortisol and thyroid hormone. Those chemicals expand and extend our emotional state. And so those chemicals are really powerful in creating residual symptoms. I know a lot of people who during COVID were like, my brain doesn't seem like it's working right. It's foggy. I just don't feel like myself. Well, all of our cortisol level was super high because of the stress and the uncertainty of the pandemic. So it was to be expected that people would have cognitive fog and challenges with memory and feeling like the days are passing in a different time frame, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that, those 6 brain systems are all working in combination with the rest of your biology every moment of every day. You are constantly you are a big old chemical soup. Every single human being on earth is an extremely powerful super being full of life and a process of cycle of life and death going on the cellular level, going on a tissue level, and going
Mhm.
on a biological level. And
Wow.
so what we have to learn how to do is actually recognize the impact of those primitive brain systems on our everyday thought processes and how it causes us to interpret each other and respond to each other.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. That is a lot, but my goodness, I've gotten it in.
Well, here's the
Especially
thing. You don't have to remember it all today. It's not, they can come to the trauma cure and I'll give you this and give you even more in that.
well, I'm glad you brought that up because for people who want more, especially want more from you, how can they contact you? And talk a
They
little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So after I left clinical medicine, meaning that I no longer see patients, I no longer see people one to one. I had a traumatic health situation within myself. So I realized that I didn't want to take this information with me, right? I needed to find a way to teach it and train other people so that they could know and understand this. So I created a nonprofit organization called Dr. Alauna Trauma Recovery Institute. And at Detroit, we create low or no cost mental health education, like the Minding Your Amygdala podcast is available usually on your favorite podcast outlets. And we have a show called Demystifying Mental Health that's on blackdoctor.org, which is a monthly show where we break down different mental health concepts. But most importantly, twice a year, I do a live virtual educational event called The Trauma Cure, Creators Using Radical Empathy. And in the Trauma Cure, it's the next one is May 31st through it's a Saturday, and then Sunday, June 1st from 9 to 5 Central Standard Time. People ask me, where is this happening? It's happening in your house. It's happening wherever you are because it's virtual. And it's
Virtual.
fun. What we do is we actually talk through not only these concepts that we're talking about here, but we are in a community of people who believe in empathy, who are deeply committed to learning this information and practicing skills that help us to have healthier coping mechanisms than what we've been shown and what we've been taught in this kind of chaotic world that we live in. And so within that program, I introduced them to the Trauma Recovery Academy, which is my membership-based program where there's 24/7 coursework that's available online that they can listen to, master your amygdala, master your trauma, and some of the other courses that I've created that explain this in detail, and then come for monthly coaching groups where I help them to apply the concepts that they've learned within the coursework. So that's the way that people can work with me. But I do not do one-to-one appointments. And what I do is not treatment. I make that very clear to distinguish for people that you're not a patient when you come in my door. You are a learner. You're coming into a school. And the school is about you and about your body and your brain and your biology. So I'm not the one that's going to sit and listen to all your problems. That's for your therapist. Keep your therapist, right? Keep your psychiatrist so you can get your prescription and you can take your medication when you're supposed to. What you do with me is you come and you get education about this brain and body and what it's doing. And I give you tools to activate your prefrontal cortex. Again, this most evolved part of our brain that's just sitting there waiting to come on and help us get it together. Okay. So when you know about these brain systems and you understand them, then you're able to control them. It's like, how do you control something that you don't even know you have? And that's
Wow.
where we are. Right now, we're just operating without having a full knowledge and understanding of ourselves. So we think it's the other people doing it to us.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. So just really being aware of who you are, your components, how to utilize it, almost in the sense of tools,
It
understanding. Go on.
literally, I
Yeah.
call it the trauma toolbox.
Wow. I, yeah, it was a couple things that you said that just really stimulated because it's something about being empowered. If I'm educated about something, I'm empowered. But if I don't know, I'm really self-sabotaging and not even knowing this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we are needing, and when I said a dying generation, I was talking on all spheres because if a person is not knowledgeable about what's going on with their own body, in their own mind, we have a brain, right? But we really never we don't appreciate it. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Like, what is it doing?
I
What's it in there doing?
I appreciate these nails. I get them done. I pay attention to them, right? I appreciate parts of my body other than that part. And that's the part that really functions. That's my, if I was to say I'm a machine, that would be the nucleus of it. But
Absolutely.
unfortunately, that's the part I am the most ignorant of.
And we are practitioners. So, and I'm telling you, I didn't know this information from my medical training. This information came through conversation after conversation after conversation and reading research papers and, being in the fire of a very
Mhm.
specific situation. I really don't know it was a God led thing. I don't take credit for it because God put me in the position to see it. And I was just willing to ask the right questions and do the right research because at its core, I'm a scientist and I'm taught to observe by the scientific method. And if I'm practicing at the top of my field and I'm very good at it and getting great feedback from patients and other people, but I'm
Mhm.
still seeing a huge gap in the treatments that we're able to offer
Mhm.
and the world, then that says to me that we're missing something. So I began to look for what was missing. And
Mhm.
in the process of doing that, this is what I discovered. And I think that, one day, we will, this will be common knowledge and nobody will be shocked or surprised that their emotions come from within themselves. But we're primitive. Right now, the way humans are designed, if you think about it, we are built seeing the other person. We're built looking outward. I can only see myself because we have the technology now. Mirrors are only become a common thing in households in the last 100 years, right? Our entire existence up until now, and the technology that has evolved, we're not able to see ourselves. I see my hands and my feet if I look down, but you see other people far more easily than you see yourself. So of course, our primitive ancestors would see these things happening and think to themselves, you must be causing me this pain. I don't like how you make me feel uncomfortable. So that must be how this is happening. So this is
Wow.
simply just that we have evolved to a place where we have the technology and the understanding to appreciate these things about ourselves. And I do believe that that will lead to a positive evolution in our species, where we actually begin to not only appreciate our mental health, but appreciate our power as creators. We are creating our own experience and we can control it. Now, I can't control everything about it, but you can control far more than what you have ever been taught you could control. And that is a empowering concept, that we can release these old ways of thinking about things and recognize that, our ancestors did the best they could with what they knew, but we can forgive them and also recognize they didn't know this information. They didn't have an opportunity to hold themselves accountable the way that we do. And we can do that. We can
Well,
heal and we can create a new experience.
well, Dr. Alana, you've said quite a bit. First of all, you talked about evolution, and as you said, we can heal now that we know. We know, but the world doesn't. So are you, I know you're putting the information out in the atmosphere, but are you writing any books? Are you doing any, are you publishing? How are you going? Um what's your plan? Because this is you.
Yeah.
This is you. And when I
I
say
do have
you,
an audiobook. So I have an audiobook called Wake Up to Your Brain, Body, and Behavior. It's available on dralana.com on my website. But I am actually working on my first signature book to be able to publish this and, again, create knowledge base through publishing a book as well. So that is also on the way. I'm also working on an app. The app is called Empathy Skills Practice. And that app will also be an AI based system that will teach you the skills that I go through and help you basically communicate more efficiently and more effectively in real time through AI chat and AI prompting.
because what I'm thinking of is um, grassroots, the foundation. When we
Mhm.
first, as children, learn biology, this is the information they need to hear to understand and be able to master. The same way I always say that as children, we need to learn how to do finances. The same way, in order to be productive stewards in our lives, we need to learn about ourselves, really, because the information that you are sharing, why not? Why not start as a foundation? Because then when they have evolved, when I say they, the children become adults, they're mastering this where we're behind the power curve.
Mhm. I'm in the process of creating a trauma certification for empathy skills practice for my methodology. So that's another way that practitioners such as yourself will be able to come and receive the training and have credentialing to be able to impart it within their own practices. I'm one person, and we're talking about 8 billion human beings walking the face of the earth without this information. So I do my best with my personal limitations to get the information out there. And then I put it, the responsibility is on you, who the
Yeah.
listener, the learner, the person who's sitting there, who's hearing this and like, I didn't know that. Okay, so come get some more.
Well, what I'm
And
hearing is that you're brilliant. That's what I'm
well,
hearing.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I
and
appreciate
so
that.
that's why, you're wanting this to get out, and I understand you're one, and it's train the trainer and getting it out there. But again, this is great. And you're making me kind of, I don't want to use the word anxious, but really excited that this can get out there, and that if we can change lives with this information,
Mhm.
how can the world just change? Because when you were talking about the mirror neurons, you know, if we, again, educated, if we're knowing these things, how can we manipulate it in our lives to see things better, to
It's
be
so
able to
powerful.
have the change in a self-talk of it's just wow. I'm just almost just a loss of words.
Well, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that, and I'm glad that this has resonated with you as it as it did with me. It's my favorite topic because I've seen change. I see people every day that I've worked with, that I've taught this information, who, were in traditional mental health settings for years, 20, 30, 40 years, and have been to their pastors, have been to their psychiatrists, have been to their therapists, have been all over the place, and no one had ever taught them about trauma. And it's a heavy anointing. I'll tell you that. I don't take it lightly, and it doesn't sit easily on me because it wasn't what I would never have chose this. This is truly a calling. I was busy. I loved minding my business in my little office. I could walk past my patients in the grocery store, and they just wink at them. You don't have to see me. Nobody has to know that I'm helping you as long as you're good. That's how I like it.
Yeah.
I'm a very private person. So having to step up and be the Beyonce of mental health and be out here trying to, get people to listen, it's hard. It's hard, and watching a world that is so chaotic because we don't understand mental health, chaotic enough to put a literally demented person into the most powerful role in the world. So that tells me, matter of fact, multiple multiple narcissistic and unwell people in highly powerful positions. That tells me that we are very addicted to this primitive brain and the input from this primitive brain, and it drives people's thought processes and behaviors. And so we scratch our heads and we go, what's wrong with the conspiracy theorists? What's wrong with these people that they think like this? And
Mhm.
what's wrong with them is that they have a brain that they do not know how to control. And so whether we know that it's all of this is going on, our brain doesn't care. It's just in there doing stuff. So it is driving the bus, and we are all experiencing the results of the primitive brain and primitive beliefs driving extremely powerful primitive beings. That's us.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, for people out there that want to get in contact with you, how can they?
They can follow me on social media, Dr. Alauna, Dralauna, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You cannot call me for an appointment because you can't have one because we're not doing that anymore. You can come to the Trauma Cure, and you can find the information for that at thetraumacure.com. And if you go on thetraumacure.com, it breaks down in detail what we talk about within the educational webinar. And also you can access information about the Trauma Recovery Academy and those things through my websites.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest tonight. And I hope in the future we can collaborate again, and I can have you as a guest again, especially after more products come out. We want to we want to help with that as well, and also just talk more in depth about your not your workshop, your academy. So again, thank you, Dr. Alana. I appreciate it. And for everyone out there, if you
Thank you.
can
Thank you for
make
having me.
sure, you're welcome. You are so welcome. Make sure you all that you go to this page, or if you're at the page already, because I'm talking to the people on Facebook, but go to YouTube, Traumatic Makeover TV, and subscribe and like lastly share. So again, thank you again. What a wonderful night it has been. We've been educated. We've been empowered. And with this information, we will continue heal. So have a wonderful night, and we will see you next week on Traumatic Makeover TV.
Dr. Tanner's on the mic, healing wounds unspoken. Trauma on the table, bandages broken open. Folks walking shattered, leave with hearts wide awoken. Transform through the pain, from the dark to the golden. Traumatic makeover, she's guiding through the fire. With every